Hey everybody, and welcome to this video on solving an equation for a variable. So let's do it. Alright, so we've spent some time solving all sorts of equations, like the four you see in front of you. And in each of them, there's only one unknown quantity, so there's only one variable. To solve the equation means to find what number, when we substitute it in for that variable, will make the statement true. But every once in a while, we're going to be faced with equations that have two unknowns in them, so two variables. For example, 2y plus 4x equals 16. Now again, we have unknown quantities, which are variables, and all we're trying to do are find numbers such that when we substitute them in for the variables, makes the equation true. For instance, if y equals 4 and x equals 2, then we see that the equation is made true. What's crazy about these equations is that they're going to have lots of pairs of numbers that make them true. So they're going to have lots of solutions. For instance, if y equals 10 and x equals -1, we see that that pair of numbers makes this equation true as well. So it's a solution to this equation with two variables. Now, there are actually infinitely many pairs of numbers that we could find to substitute in for x and y to make this equation true. One of our tasks later on is going to be to find lots of these pairs of numbers quickly and accurately. And one way to do that is to rewrite this equation as y equals something or x equals something. Now the skills that we use to change this equation into y equals or x equals are the exact same as those that we use to solve the equations before. Alright, let's first try to solve this equation for y. That means isolate y on one side of the equation. Well, the first thing we can do is isolate the 2y. So let's subtract 4x from both sides of the equation. Now all we need to do is to divide both sides of this equation by 2, and we'll have isolated the y. Be careful, on the right-hand side, you need to divide the whole side of the equation by 2. So you need to divide 16 by 2 and the -4x by 2. And so we have successfully taken this original equation and we'd say we've solved it for y. Let's try this again, but let's solve it for x. First thing we're going to do, if we're eventually going to try to isolate x, let's first isolate 4x. So let's subtract 2y from both sides. Now, to isolate x, all we have to do is divide both sides of this equation by 4. And remember, on the right-hand side, we have to divide the entire side of the equation by 4. That means both the 16 and the -2y. And so, we've successfully taken this equation and solved it for x as well. Alright, here's another equation with two unknown quantities and therefore two variables. -4d plus 5g equals 20. And if we're looking for a solution to this equation, we've got to find a number to substitute in for d and another number for g so that it'll make this equation true. For instance, if d were 0 and g were 4, we see that the statement would be made true. So d equals 0 and g equals 4 is a solution to that equation. Or maybe if d were -10 and g were -4, that would also make that statement true. So d equals -10 and g equals -4 is another solution to this equation. Later on, in order to find way more pairs really quickly, it's going to be really helpful to solve for g or to solve for d. Let's start by solving for g. Alright, first things first, let's at least isolate the 5g by adding 4d to both sides of this equation. Now we divide both sides of the equation by 5, and on the right-hand side, making sure to divide both 20 by 5 and 4d by 5. All right, now let's solve for d. First things first, let's at least isolate the negative 4d by subtracting 5g from both sides of the equation. Now, in order to isolate d, we just divide both sides by negative 4. Now we got to be really careful on the right-hand side because we're dividing both of these by a negative number. The left-hand side will be easy. That's just going to be d. On the right-hand side, 20 divided by negative 4 is negative 5. And negative 5g divided by negative 4 is going to be 5/4 g. Got to be really, really conscious of your signs whenever you divide by a negative number. And so we've successfully taken this equation and solved it for both g and for d. All right, time for some practice problems. In front of you, you got the same equation involving two variables. 5b minus 2m equals negative 20. And all I want us to practice doing is solving this equation first for m and second for b. So when you pause the video, take care of that, and when you're done, play the video and we'll see how it went. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope you enjoyed.